I guess the conference is finally underway. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm at the point now where a lot of my conference travel is to places that I've never been before, so I was very excited to get a chance to come to Belgrade. This is kind of interesting for me. Normally I do talks about testing, but with Sebastian here, I don't feel so bad about not talking about testing. But they asked me to come and give a talk instead of about how awesome testing is. I wanted to talk about how awesome I am. So, so one of the things that I've learned over time about giving really good talks is that you're not really supposed to talk about yourself unless, of course, the talk is actually about yourself. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was how I've approached building my career as a programmer. Because for every programmer, there comes a time when programming makes the leap. You get an opportunity to make a leap from programming just being the job that pays the bills to being a career. And so I kind of wanted to talk about how I went through all that sort of stuff. So what do you need to know about me? But I tend to pace a lot, so you have to forgive me. It's one way to get rid of the nerves. So I've been using PHP since roughly 1998 or so. I was working doing tech support for a company that was selling, this shows you how old I am, selling compact discs to professional DJs. And they needed a website, and they wanted to put their catalog online, and they were really super cheap and didn't want to pay for a license from Microsoft. Yeah, so I started with PHP in 1990. I had done a tiny bit of Perl when I had gone to college, and I hadn't liked it, mainly because the class was at 4 o'clock on a Friday, when nobody really wanted to be there. But we needed something free, so just searching around, I found PHP, found MySQL, built the website, and PHP has been the thing that's been paying my bills since '98 for the most part. I also started speaking at conferences in 2007 at PHP Quebec, which is now, if you've heard of the Confu conference in Montreal, PHP Quebec became that. And I've been a conference organizer since 2012. I run an event that is much smaller than this one called True North PHP that's in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's usually the first weekend in November. We're doing it one last time. 5 times is enough. I'm getting bored and want to do other things. So for other speakers, please, I know you guys all well enough. Please submit to my conference, and I'll do my best to have you come. So what else? I've written several books about testing, unit testing especially. I'm a contributor to OpenCFP, which is a PHP app for submitting conference talks. So people are always suspicious when my talks get accepted at a conference that uses this thing. They think maybe I put some sort of backdoor into the code that looks for my username. I'm also a very, very enthusiastic Twitter user. My wife is always amazed when she looks at how many times I've tweeted and how many followers that I have. In fact, a friend of my oldest daughter's accused me of buying most of my Twitter followers. I'm also probably one of the most passionate testing supporters in PHP you will ever meet. This is my car, and that's a custom license plate that says test more. So you should never doubt my commitment to wanting people to test stuff. So PHP has been very, 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 very good to me. Even though these days I don't do a lot of PHP, I will never completely abandon the PHP community because it helped me create the career that I have. So when we talk about building your career, I've always gone with 2 guiding principles. One of them's from my mother. My mother is a retired school teacher. And so she always had this phrase that her students hated to hear, which was, we're not losers, we're choosers. It's the idea that you need to, you get the opportunity in your life to make decisions about things. And sometimes those decisions are good, and sometimes those decisions are bad. But at the end of the day, you're still making a choice. So for me, it was always about accepting responsibility, being happy about the good things that you've done, but also accepting when you've made choices that didn't work. And also the second one is a more kind of controversial one, the idea that luck is when skill and opportunity cross paths. I believe that weird events happen in life. For example, getting invited to fly 13 hours from Canada to come to Serbia and speak. That's like a lucky thing. But nobody is inherently lucky, and nobody is inherently unlucky. It's just a combination of being able to take advantage when opportunities come up. And my whole career has been about me watching for opportunities to do things. So before I start talking about some of this stuff, I want to emphasize that the way I built my career worked for me. So some of what I'm talking about may not work for you, mainly if you're not like as aggressive and loud as me, or willing to get in trouble at work like I am. So the most important thing is to have a plan, and that's really the thing I want to show what my plan was, and I hope that by looking at some of these things, you'll be able to get your own plan in place. Always have a plan. So before we get this, we're going to go back to the future to talk a little bit about this. So right now, I'm very fortunate to work for Mozilla, the people behind Firefox. I do QA work for them in their cloud services department. Firefox has all these other services that it talks to behind the scenes for like synchronizing bookmarks, figuring out there's new versions of things, add-ons, extensions, all sorts of stuff. So the team that I work for, we test all these things. So we do a lot of black box testing, QA stuff. I end up spending a lot of time writing scripts in Python to test APIs. I do end-to-end testing in different versions of Mozilla, of the browser, the general release one, the nightly one, beta, all that stuff. I'm very, very fortunate to have gotten this position, and I'm going to talk about how I ended up there as a lesson in building your career, and how my involvement with open source, which is the big thing, helped me get there. So I only worked for Mozilla 4 days a week. I was very smart to negotiate that. It wasn't that I'm going to do your standard 40 hours in 4 days. No. I'm lazy. So I do 32 hours a week with them, and then on Fridays, I work on my own stuff. So that's when I write my books, that's when I work on my presentations, that's when I get into arguments with people on Twitter, that's when I'm very happy that my wife doesn't complain because a little bit of extra money comes in. So the first part of my career I could label as before I got involved in open source was from 1998 until 2006. A very typical journey for junior to intermediate programmers. Worked at a bunch of places doing PHP work. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, some of them were really, really bad and taught me lessons about what to never do again. But it was around 2006 that I got involved with open source. I got involved with the Cake PHP project. And as I look back at having done this job for almost 20 years, it was my involvement with Cake that was really the turning point. That was the thing that made me decide that that I could turn programming as a job, which even in the late 90s, early 2000s was a well-paying one. But I felt like something was missing, that I needed something else to keep my interest level high. Otherwise, I was just going to fall into the programming as a job and probably hate it even more than I did at the end of 2005. But I got involved with it. So it was kind of like a gateway into like a bunch of awesome friendships and awesome opportunities that I worked very, very hard to make sure that I could take advantage of. That's also where I perfected my trolling communication skills online. Back then, the major way of people communicating was mailing lists. So I started off at Cake deciding I was going to be the person that was going to be difficult about everything. And that was a lot of fun. Telling people, calling them newbies, and telling them to read the manual, and basically shooting down all their ideas in hope that they turn those ideas into something really good. But that got boring and counterproductive after a while. So instead of trolling on the mailing list, I just started trolling people on Twitter, and that was even more fun than when I did it on the mailing list. But what I learned about being involved in Cake PHP was that open source software, it forces you to communicate in writing and not in real time. I've been working remotely for a bunch of different companies for like 10, 11, I think it's 11 years now. And one of the things I've noticed that when you're not in the same room as everybody else, and sometimes when those people aren't even sitting next to you, communication becomes very, very difficult. So you have to learn how to write and the main thing is learning how to get your ideas across, but not in real time. Because, email, it's asynchronous. You can never count on somebody responding to your things. The only way to get real-time answers from people is to actually be talking to them, oddly enough, in real time, in person or on Skype or whatever. So for me, I learned to communicate much better. It was a really big deal for me to, as I tell I have 2 kids, 2 girls, ages 16 and 11, so it's a very fun time in my house. And my oldest daughter is always amazed that I can do exactly this, get up in front of stage, on a stage in front of a very large number of people, and not like completely freak out. And I try to remind her that there was a time when I was not comfortable doing this at all. I was not comfortable sharing my ideas. I was not comfortable trying to help people. These are all skills that I learned. I keep telling some of my other programmer friends, if I can learn to not completely melt down on stage while talking, then certainly other people can do it, because there's nothing special about me. I just applied those skills, right? So Cake taught me how to communicate with people. It also told me some things about myself, where I liked being able to give something back. The truth of the internet these days is that most of the underpinnings are built on open and free software. And it's very, very easy to take, consume all these things. I mean, could you imagine how much it would cost us if we had to pay for PHP, a license for it, every single year to upgrade it? It would have a fraction of the people using it. So after having used and relied on all these technologies for so many years, when I think about the free databases, web servers, editors, because I'm a Vim guy, Vim for life, it's amazing how much free stuff we take for granted that just is the base, the foundation for everything. So I wanted to give something back, and getting involved in Cake and contributing small little pieces, small bug fixes, turning around from trolling people to helping people made a big difference. And also discovered that I like teaching people. Now, I guess that's kind of natural, having, with my mother being a teacher, I'm sure all that stuff was programmed inside me somewhere. So that was in 2006. So in 2007, I said, okay, let's figure out how to leverage my involvement with Cake into better things for myself. So my next goal was I wanted to start working from home. So I live just outside Toronto in Canada, and I live like in a fourth-ring suburb. And so I used to take the train to commute in every day, and it was 90 minutes to get to work and 2 hours to get home. Yeah, that sucks bad enough already. I hated traveling and not having control over my schedule. And then my kids were really little, and I found I was getting up and leaving the house at 7 in the morning, and I wasn't getting home until 7:30, 8 o'clock. So I was never spending any time with my kids. Anytime I had to work late, my wife was getting pissed off at me being gone so much. So I'm like, I need to change this. So whatever it takes, I'm going to figure out how to start working from home. Because I was always seeing my kids. This is not my kid, but crying kids at home because daddy wasn't home. All right? Kind of sucked. So I was able to turn my work with Cake PHP into a very early job with Cake Development Corporation, which was a consulting company set up by Larry Masters, who was at that time the lead developer for Cake. So again, I took my open source involvement, leveraged some connections, got myself a job doing remote stuff. Didn't work out because Larry and I's personalities clashed, and I think I basically left before I got fired, which is kind of a common theme throughout this presentation. But it was really good. It taught me, again, how to start working with people remotely, and it told me what skills I needed to be able effectively to do the job. So the job made me grumpy. Again, this is not my cat. I actually have been asked if Grumpy Cat is my cat, because I'm the grumpy programmer. If the Grumpy Cat was my cat, I wouldn't have to work anymore. It would be pretty good. I would just coast off of the royalties for the image. So Cake DC was good, but didn't quite fit. So that wasn't working. And I was like, okay, I bounced around to a couple places. So that was 2007. At the beginning of 2008, I was like, okay, now I want to find a job doing what I want to do, right? This is now I have had almost 10 years as a developer. I felt like, okay, I've done enough kind of different sizes of projects. Let me find a project doing something, a subject that I wanted to do. So someone contacts me just out of the blue and says, hey, Chris, I've been reading your blog, following you on Twitter, saw that you're available for work. Let's talk about it. So it led to a job with these people. I know it's some stupid font, and I always told them that the font was dumb. It says XML team, so already one strike against them for relying on XML. But this was a company that had a very interesting business model. They would collect sports data from both in North America and from Europe, reformat it into XML, and then syndicate that content to all their clients. So for me, who's a huge sports fan, I'm a huge baseball guy, which is very odd for a Canadian since we're always hockey, right? All about hockey, but I love baseball. So for me, a chance to work on sports data, awesome. So that's where I got a chance to really learn about that remote work plus sports data made things so I wasn't so grumpy after all. So what did I learn during my time there? I spent almost 3 years working for these people. That PHP, my project stopped being about the fact that they were using PHP and that PHP was just a tool to solve a problem. This is a very common problem you see online where people, they make everything about the technology. They're very excited that they're doing work with PHP or Ruby, or if only they switched to using this web framework built on top of this language that compiles down to Erlang. If only we found the right tool, I would be happy because I could tell people, oh, I'm not using this old boring PHP anymore. I'm doing Python, I'm doing Ruby. All I'm doing is JavaScript, all I'm doing is Node. But for me, after about 10 years of programming, and in 2008, yeah, it was 10 years, I realized that what I wanted to do was solve problems, and PHP was the tool that I used. It didn't matter to me that it was PHP, and I never presented my solutions as only being possible because I was using PHP. So that was kind of a first mind shift. The second thing was I realized that remote collaboration takes extra effort. At XML Team, it was a Canadian-based company, but everybody was remote. So we only got together once a year, actually in person. So again, you learn very quickly what works when you're trying to communicate ideas to people who are not in the same room as you. And I learned about how to properly communicate over IRC and how to sell my ideas via text, and just basically how to negotiate all those relationships and the back and forth to get to do the things that I wanted to do. And also, that's when I started to get really comfortable working remotely, get stuff set up at home, a nice desk, a nice comfortable chair, the monitors the way I wanted. And after that experience, I'm like, I never, ever want to go back into an office again. I really resent it anytime I have to go to the office. I make sure to always tell my boss that I don't like going into the office, and that's worked out pretty good. So in the late summer of 2010, it looked like in the North American sports that both the National Football League, so American football, and the National Basketball Association were going to go on strike in the fall. So I'm thinking, what happens? I asked them, so what happens if the NFL and the NBA go on strike? Because it never happened that they were both on strike at the same time. And the NFL and NBA represented the largest part of our clients looking for that data. And they said, oh, well, we'll just take a pay cut until it's over. And I was like, no. Nope. I'm not taking a pay cut. I like money. I'll always put money before many other things. I like being able to pay my bills because I know for most people, their bank that holds the mortgage on their house isn't going to care that you had to take a pay cut. So I was like, no, I can't do that. So I started looking. And I know at this time, I've been going to a number of conferences. And I had heard about Ben Ramsey, who's a speaker on the PHP side of things, that he was working for a startup that was doing some really interesting things with advertising inside Facebook. So I just emailed him and said, hey, Ben, it's Chris. He knew who I was. I'm looking for a new job. The company's doing some interesting things. Things are starting to go sideways where I work. Maybe we could work something out. So there's Ben. I don't know if hopefully some of you know him. What I learned was that friendships that you made through open source, they lead to jobs, right? It's always interesting when I go to a conference how many of the speakers I actually know. That shows that I've been doing this way too long, that I know so many of these people. But the friendships always came first, and then the opportunity to do things with them came second, and then the jobs came third. So for me, that became a realization that by getting involved in open source and then getting involved on the speaking circuit meant that there were all sorts of other opportunities that I was able to take advantage of. So I worked for Ben for a while at Moontoast. Stupid startup name, but that's Americans love to give their startups really stupid names. They were doing interesting stuff, but it was a little bit before its time. And then we had this little fun incident after a disastrous deploy, where the CTO decided to turn a bunch of shit off. Turn a bunch of stuff off that should have been turned on. And it was a complete crash. And I said, if we had done what I said about this 6 weeks ago, when we knew this was going to happen, and we had done the tests that I wanted to do, we would have figured all this stuff out. So the CEO of the company told me this. He said, Chris, startups don't test. Testing is a waste of time. So what do you think my reaction was? Nope. So I said, okay, that's it. I'm out of here. Also at the same time, I learned that startups are not a good fit for me. My niche was helping people to test things. And I acknowledge that most startups, at the early stages of them, before the startup becomes an actual company with revenue and morals, testing is not a thing they really care about much. So that's what I kind of learned, right? And also, I've always told Ben has asked me over the years, was it his fault that I left? And it's not his fault, and Ben was a very, very good boss. So if Ben hears about this, you were a good boss, don't panic. So what I decided after that, I wanted to stop working for small companies. For the most part, I've been working at very small places, 10 to 12 people, maybe only 3 or 4 developers. I'm like, okay, I want to get that experience of working for a larger company, right? Because this is how my thing was always about with jobs. I would always think about what skills I wanted to learn, and then I would go and find companies that would give me those opportunities. So whereas most people are like just concerned about, I want to keep my job and keep paying my bills, my ego was so big, I was like, I can easily find another job. I'm not going to sweat it. As my wife relayed a story to a coworker of hers, that since 2001, the longest I have been involuntarily employed is like a week. So clearly over a long period of time, I had proven my ability to like network and talk to people and find a job. So when I was going to quit a job, it was never a problem. I never felt like I was going to have a hard time. So in 2012, I said, okay, I want to work for a larger group, and I want to focus on finding a position where I can help the company and the developers as a whole get better. So I found a job working for these people, Kaplan Learning Systems. They're a company based out of the US in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. And it was basically online learning. So you go there, take courses. They were doing things like helping real estate agents get licensed and things like that. Interesting technology. Their commitment to testing was like 100%, so they had a really good test suite in place. I was able to implement many, many features there without actually using the application at all, just by writing tests against what their expectations were. And I remember my manager being amazed that I could actually make something work without using the application. I was like, that's why we have the test. But it was okay, but I only lasted for 3 months because I wouldn't do office politics. And that was the weirdest thing. We had a situation where our manager was constantly relaying all our complaints, being told that our feedback was anonymous, but then he would attach our names to it and give it to his manager. So I was like, after sitting in meetings with my manager's manager, and the whole team is getting chewed out over stuff, and we're like, this is all confidential stuff we told our manager. So I'm like, again, I'm out of here. Enough of that stuff. So before I had taken the job at Kaplan, I was talking to Matt Turland, who is an American programmer, who's a speaker. He just was at PHP Tech in St. Louis that went on this past week. And so I had interviewed there at the same time I had interviewed with Kaplan, and I turned down Synacor, this company, because Kaplan's offer was a little bit better. But I just hit him up and said, hey, you know that the job I took instead of Synacor, things aren't going good. Is that job at Synacor still open? And then that's Matt. Great guy, really guided me around through Synacor to help me get up to speed. And so this is Synacor. They're based in Buffalo, New York. And recently, this is very good timing that I'm doing this presentation. They recently won a contract with AT&T in the US to handle Synacor's big thing is that they would create the home pages and portal pages for like really super large US telecommunication companies. So they did Verizon, they did Comcast, they did a whole bunch of stuff. They just convinced AT&T to abandon Yahoo. I mean, Yahoo's just about dead anyway. But they switched their contract to use Synacor, and that's worth $300 million to Synacor. So Synacor is able to hire and expand, and I'm very, very happy for my friends who are still at Synacor. So at that time, Synacor, I felt like this was where I was supposed to be, because they basically created a job for me. They're like, we're going to hire you. We haven't figured out what we're going to do with you yet, but we have some ideas. So they actually created a job for me where I was labeled as a principal engineer, which gave me the power to say no to really crappy jobs inside the company, which is always good. And I got to focus on testing, which is what I wanted to do. So working with their team to get their testing practices better, work with them to get some feedback on their existing tools, just basically helping the team get better. And that's what I wanted to do, right? At that time, my skills and reputation done through open source, through talking about stuff on Twitter, through speaking at conferences, led me to be a perfect fit for what they wanted. So this is something to think about too. When you're doing jobs, it should always be you want to build your skills, and you always look for opportunities. That's what I've always been about. I want to learn something new. I want to do something new. Who out there is doing the type of things that I want to do? And also be willing to hold out and wait for the perfect thing. There's nothing worse than switching. Like when I was with Kaplan and it only lasted 3 months, I felt terrible because I had committed to do all this stuff, and the job ended up to be crap. And after that, I said, I don't ever want to go through that again, where I'm bouncing around to jobs that I don't like. So my skills that I built up and all those connections meant that they literally created a job for me, which is really awesome, right? I also discovered I really enjoyed working with teams on stable projects. Just the startup, let's get this thing done, minimum viable product and all that other stuff, it wasn't for me because I cared about stuff being stable. I cared about stuff working properly. I cared about our ability to keep maintaining that product and have it grow slowly over time. But also, I had never worked for such a diverse group of talented programmers. For a medium-sized company nestled away in a part of the States that is not known for technology, a bunch of super smart programmers there, building really good tools, really great infrastructure. I was always impressed by whenever I would ask somebody in the company to make something for me, or do we have a tool that does something, either they had the tool already, or within a week someone created one for me. So this is where you discovered it's always good to work with people smarter than you. If you're the smartest person where you work, your skills are going to decline really, really quickly. So this brings us up to the midsummer of 2014. And my goal was, I only want to work 4 days a week so I can stop working evenings on my books. It was about this time where I decided I want to make some more money on the side. So an easy way for me to do that was to turn a lot of the work I've been doing at conferences into books. So I wrote a bunch of books. But I was doing it in the evenings instead of spending time with my wife and my kids. And so I could see that even though I tell them, look, I'm going to do this, and I've done all this research, and I know people want to buy these books, and that they're going to pay me money for them, instead of just me creating something and hoping, I did all the research. But, I mean, way too many evenings leaving my wife alone on the couch, where I could tell she was mad. Well, of course, being married. I've been married for almost 18 years, so I'm sure she's mad at me all the time and just doesn't tell me anymore. But I could see that it wasn't going well. But I didn't want to give up the book stuff because I wanted to run those through to completion and let the money come in and then tell my wife, look, we have a bunch of money, now our vacation is easier and we can buy a car and do all this stuff. There's a friend of mine who's done a lot of work on teaching people how to do research for products. Her name is Amy Hoy. Her website is called unicornfree.com. And she has a course on how to learn how to do research. So if you're going to create a book, if you're going to create an application, whatever you're going to do, she teaches you how to do the research to make sure that before you've committed to doing this thing, people are ready to that you've seen that picture on Twitter online where shut up and take my money, with Fry from Futurama throwing dollar bills at somebody. That's the exact position you want to be in. You don't, I've said this a million times, I can always make more money, I can always find another job, but the one thing I can never ever make more of is time. When people say I can't make any time for this, we're all making, back to the we're not losers, we're choosers thing, we're all making choices about what we spend our time on. Just some people choose differently. I chose that if I was going to spend my time not hanging out with my wife, that I wanted to make money off of it, just to make the rest of my life easier. I know a lot of programmers are very uncomfortable talking about money and how much they make and how much things cost. I always view money as just a tool. Money is a tool that lets me do things that I want to do. So I wanted to make sure I was making money. So at that time, I was still working for Synacor, and things looked like at Synacor, they were on a bit of a downswing, and it looked like they were getting ready to chop a whole bunch of people, just because a few contracts had dried up. And I was like, man, maybe I need to get out of here because I never like to be fired. So I was at Sunshine PHP, and I talked to Evan Curry, and I said, hey, Evan, I know I spoke to him about potentially working with the team at Rove, where Marco at the front still works. I remember talking to Evan saying, if something opens up, let me know, because I'm thinking I'm going to need to switch in a little bit. So I talked to him and said, let's talk. So this is Evan, very handsome man. I miss him. He's been off the internet for a long time. I never get to see him. I wish I could see him more. But Evan agreed to my ridiculous demands about how I only wanted to work 4 days a week. He talked to a client that Rove is like a consulting company. They had a client that wanted a person with my skills to work with them, and they agreed. They said, yeah, 4 days a week is fine. So that's Rove. That's the dog that Ed and I always talk about on our podcast that does all the real work at Rove instead of Marco and Gary and all those other guys. So this is Rove. And working for Rove was really, really good. So what did it teach me? Well, the big thing was it taught me that my mental health counts more than anything. I was starting to get burnt out because I was doing all this work in the evenings. But I still wanted to do these things because I liked the money, right? This is unfortunately the side effect of being ambitious, right? I still wanted to do this, but I wanted to find a way I could continue to do all these things and not feel like I was never spending any time with my family. So the 4 days a week, since I switched to that, I have felt like, I don't know, like 1,000,000% less stressed about work. Because I found my brain was constantly thinking about all the side projects and things outside of the day job. But now with this the 4-day work week hack, I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff until Fridays. So Fridays was the day just for me. But also working at Rove, I found again, I had success by helping the teams there, the client that I was working for, doing lengthy refactoring work of their application. They had an old application that was Zen Framework 1, and they had some Zen Framework 2 stuff in it, and we had a bridge to make those things work together. And so I basically spent a lot of time doing the type of work that the existing developers didn't want to do. They didn't want to go through the code and update it to include namespacing. They didn't want to go through the code and check for code style so that everybody was putting their brackets and braces in the correct places and doing things camel case and things like that. But I'm nuts, I like to do that sort of thing, to go through the code base and shape it and get it ready to work. So again, that was kind of a success for me. And I tell you, the 4-day work week hack is real. I highly recommend figuring out a way to work 4 days a week for the same as 5. It's best decision I've made in my entire career. So this brings us to the middle of 2015. I get a message on Twitter from a longtime friend of mine saying, hey, Chris, Mozilla is hiring for a position that is junior but could become senior. So this is Laura Thompson, who works for Mozilla. She is their director of platform engineering. She started off as just a regular programmer with them. And she's from Australia, so she's always a hoot to talk to because she swears liberally, which for me is very refreshing. And I had told her when I first met her a long time ago in 2008 at a conference out in Vancouver in Canada on the West Coast, that if anything at Mozilla ever opened up that you thought would be a good fit, to let me know. And so over the years, we stayed in touch. And so again, this is all about my ability to make connections through open source. Thank you. I'm almost done. So what did I learn? So I've been at Mozilla since, it took them like 3 or 4 months to hire me because like any very large company, hiring is slow. They had the position, then the position got filled via an internal transfer, and then they tried to figure out, can they steal a hiring position away from another team to have that for me? And so eventually they did. So I started there in November, and I'm there as a contractor, so I don't get as much vacation time as I would like. But probably in November, I'm going to sign up with them as a full-time employee. But basically, Mozilla went out of their way because of my reputation and my skills to, again, create a job for me on their team. So what I learned was that my combination of development skills and QA skills have made people like me very, very valuable. In my discussions with most of the teams that I work with at Mozilla, there's always a bit of an uncomfortable silence when I remind them that before I came here, I spent 18 years creating applications with one of the most hated languages on the internet. So don't try to pull anything on me. I can tell when you're cutting corners. But the interesting lesson about Mozilla is that working on things that are used by literally millions of people every day is very exciting, and this changed my approach on how I test things. I care way more about stability, about things working exactly the way that they're supposed to do, and I have become way more aggressive about blocking releases over things that the developers think are petty, because what a developer think is user stupidity is often can become a huge problem when it's millions of people hitting a service that we've written. And also on top of it, the ability to open source everything that I do at Mozilla is awesome. Mozilla does almost all their work out in the open, meaning that any code that we use, it's probably up in a publicly available repo on GitHub somewhere. So I really, really enjoy the ability to take what I've done and share it with others. So we've made it all the way back to present day. So let's do the too long didn't read summary of what's going on here. Let's go back and talk about all my career stuff, about the losers and choosers thing. Own your successes because your successes are due to your skill, but own your failures as well because sometimes we all make bad decisions. Not every employment decision I've made has been good. I've made a lot of mistakes. But also the big thing I learned also that social skills matter as much as your programming skills. If I had not learned how to stand up in front of large groups of people and talk without like being dripping in sweat, or learn how to write nice emails to people, finding nice ways to tell people that they're stupid, finding nice ways to tell people that their ideas are dumb, if I hadn't learned how to do that, then I wouldn't have been able to get the type of jobs I get. But also, having a plan makes changing a lot easier. A lot of people are very scared to change jobs, scared to move, scared to try different things because they're afraid of failure, and I understand that. I have generally not been afraid of failure because I've made so many mistakes as a programmer. Making mistakes is almost like the default thing as a programmer. But I've always had a plan, and the plan was always to like find opportunities to do things that I wanted to do, and I think that has been really successful. And we talk about the luck thing. Luck is when skill and opportunities cross paths. It's not luck when success follows because you've spent time developing your skills. It's not luck when people feel like they can approach you. One of the weird things about having spoken at a lot of events is that oftentimes the audience is very reluctant to come up and talk to the speakers. They think the speakers are super talented, and I mean, a lot of them are. But generally, the difference between us and the audience is that we figured out a way to come up in front of you and talk about things. That's all it is. I just got really good at communicating with people. Despite how I pretend to be grumpy on Twitter, I'm actually quite an approachable person. I'll be here for the entire event. Don't hesitate to come up and talk to me. I'm not going to call you an idiot or just call you stupid or just tell you need to talk to my agent instead of talking to me. No. I come to these events to share what I know, but also to talk to people. Because again, when you talk about opportunities, you never know what happens when you meet somebody at random. And also, I don't think it's luck to have been able to survive to work almost 20 years in this industry. I'm finally at a point where I've noticed trends in development are finally circling back, and it's very, very weird to think that what started off as just because a company I was working for didn't want to pay for something has turned into a very long career. And so that is an oral history of how I became grumpy. Thank you very much, and enjoy the conference.
So my question is about the Friday, because I work as well as a 4-day week. How do you keep yourself motivated to work on Friday? Like, how do you keep away from distractions? What's your
so basically, how do I not just decide to spend Fridays watching TV
or just go outside because it's sunny outside, whatever?
The only answer I have for that is discipline. I mean, it's the same skill set you need if you're going to work remotely without someone constantly looking over your shoulder. If you can't work without somebody being there and constantly giving you assignments, then you're never going to be able to work remote. If you can't learn to basically get things done without constant direction. So for me, it's when I decided to work the 4 days a week, I knew that the only way that my wife wasn't going to think that I was just slacking off was that I actually had to do things. So I've been married for a long time, and making my wife happy has become a big part of my career. So as long as my wife is happy, I continue to get to do things like fly halfway across the world. I was in Australia in April. I go all over the place, and none of that works without the support of my family, right? Because then I'm gone. Because I'm home, the whole family life is centered around me being there. I take my kids to school, I pick them up, I make sure they have their lunches packed, I cook dinner, I do all that stuff, right? But it's the discipline, it's the idea that I made all these changes and I worked really, really hard to convince someone to let me do the 4-day work week. If I'm going to just toss it away to fuck around on a Friday, then it was the wrong decision to make. I'm motivated by wanting to keep making these products, keep sharing things. I like having extra money, so these things are all big-time motivators. But I tell people to have any type of long career as a programmer, it's discipline, the ability to just say, I'm going to get this thing done. Because if you can't do that, then you're never going to get from being, I think the derogatory term is a code monkey. You're never going to be from a code monkey to like a career programmer. So I plan my weeks. I plan what I'm going to do at the day job, and I plan what I'm going to do with my Fridays so that when I get to Friday, I know already. When I wake up in the morning and get my kids away to school, I know exactly what it is I'm going to be doing. So, No, I plan everything. I'm a plan everything in advance. Refer to my calendar constantly because I have good long-term memory and good short-term memory, but terrible medium-term memory. So I forget stuff all the time. So I started doing everything on a calendar. I even plan like time with my wife watching TV. I put a block in on my calendar. Well, because otherwise somebody will ask me to do something and I'll be like, yeah, sure. And then my wife's like, I thought we were watching TV. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. So again, organize, have a plan, commit to that stuff, and good things really happen. So any other questions? No, one at the back there. All right.
Okay. So is it ever okay not to test, or do deadlines usually trump testable code? Is there a compromise?
The concept of deadlines. I think Douglas Adams said the best thing. I love the sound that they make when they whoosh right on by over my head. About testing is a much longer argument than I have time on the stage to do. I don't know, I've gone from like being really aggressive about that sort of stuff, about insisting on testing, to more like trying to make people understand things about, I've done other presentations where I talk about opportunity cost and like how it can actually cost your company or you yourself, if it's you doing it, money by not testing. Because the cheapest time, obviously, to find a bug is when the developer's writing the code, right? And testing is just code, and yes, testing takes more time, and sometimes it can make deadlines challenging. But only the biggest idiot is going to look at the monetary side of things and ignore it. A bug found in production by your users could cost you 100, 1,000 times. It could destroy your company. Developer time is expensive relative to operations cost of most businesses. So do you want your developers wasting time frantically trying to find a bug that's been in production? I'm sure most people have been in the situation where you've done a push to production and things go horribly wrong. And everybody is running around trying to figure out what the problem is. When you only need one person, if you left them the hell alone, they could figure the problem out. So I've always talked about you're shifting the costs. You want to make it as cheap as possible to fix the bug. The cheapest time is when the developer's doing the work. So testing, I believe, is just, if you aren't doing some kind of automated, repetitive testing, even if it's like a sheet of paper where you've written down all the steps that you do with your application in a browser. If you're not doing that, you're really running the risks of a catastrophic failure, and you're running the risks of your company ending up spending more money and time fixing problems than creating new things that give value to the business. So, does that answer your question? All right, cool.
My question is today, can you really discipline yourself to work every day and you have to have a social life, and that is the biggest challenge for me because I'm not a big fan of spending a lot of time and every day in front of the computer. I like to go outside, I like to do some other stuff, but I like programming too. Some kind of leverage needs to be made here.
Okay, so I don't believe in like just work. Again, I'm lazy. I have hobbies, I have a family. As those who follow me on Twitter know, I play that stupid card game, Magic the Gathering. That is my outlet for getting social contact with people. Every Friday, I go down to my local store, and I play with a bunch of guys who are, some of them are young enough to be my son, and they constantly remind me of that. But again, it's about life balance too. I found that working from home, I was getting back those like 3 to 4 hours I was losing in the commute. So I was home, all the people that I loved were near me, and so it made the stresses of the job a lot easier to handle. Because I knew really, there were times when like I was working and things were just horrible, and it was good to know that I could just like walk out of my office and go sit down with my youngest daughter and just talk to her for 5 minutes. It's like, oh, Daddy, you're looking like you're going to cry. Come here. And then she would give me a hug, right? So that's when I realized that the contact with others, like you can do a social life and work and all this stuff, but again, it's about choosing to spend your time. You can, if you like doing outdoor stuff, that's awesome. I'm not a big fan of the outdoors. I like to work in my office with the air conditioning cranked up. The heat here is just bugging the hell out of me. So, but a social life is also very, very important. But this is why I structure things. Again, whenever I'm going to do stuff socially, entry goes into my calendar. Playing Magic on Friday. Having drinks at lunch with a friend. I'm going out to dinner with somebody else. I make the space for that stuff in my schedule. I prefer to keep the randomness in my life to a minimum because having contact with other people is super important. I don't blame people who, after a day of working, don't want to go anywhere near their computer. My wife is like that. She's not even a programmer. And she uses her computer the bare minimum, and she prefers to do other things with her time after work. But again, all I can suggest is take a very close look at how you're spending your time and make the decisions that are going to make you the most happiest. If it means you don't have the opportunity to like work on open source or side projects because you'd rather be like outdoors doing stuff with people, you shouldn't feel guilty about that at all. Not everyone is in a position to do what I did. Not everyone is in a position to do the type of things that the speakers get to do. It's just a choice. Right? We're making decisions about how we spend our time. I try not to feel any guilt or regret over decisions that I made because they're decisions I made knowing the potential impact. So yeah, you want to get outdoors and do stuff? Just go and do it. Don't feel bad about trying to measure yourself to other people doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Let them do their thing. You just worry about being the best you that you can be. That's the only advice I can give.